I actually had a hard time preparing for this because of that, what I told you before we started recording. I think with you, there are two ways in which I could have taken this conversation. One is talking about your work with video, enabling people to put themselves on camera. And the other is your work with entrepreneurship. So we'll start with video. Since you're an entrepreneur, what is your pitch to people to put themselves on camera?
Okay, so a lot of my work and a lot of my focus is on helping people do just that, being able to be on camera and not feel like a weirdo when they do it. And the reason I think it's important is business. Even if you're doing, high tech stuff, I'm part of a deep tech accelerator in Latin America right now. And even like the deepest of deep tech, even in those fields, it's about human relationships, right? It's about the people and how you work with them and how you connect with them. And I believe pretty strongly that if you can see their face, if you can see their facial expressions, hear their voice, there's a connection there that forms in a way that, I've been writing on the internet for a long time and I love writing, but it's different than the type of bond and connection that can form when people see your face. So that's a lot of my work, is helping people do exactly that. How do you show up on camera being yourself? But this does really good things for one's career, for one's business, for one's relationships, all kinds of good stuff.
I'm interested in knowing what has it done for you? Like, what has that journey been in, and what are the rewards you've reaped from this?
Sure. Well, I'll give you the story of how I started learning this stuff and why I got interested in it, which is I moved to Austin about 20 years ago and I played in indie rock bands and I worked for startups. And when I was playing in the band, I got a repetitive stress injury. And I'm working for startups, like working so much that the injury to my hand, like typing, was becoming difficult. So something I did to communicate was I would just like film kind of short videos. This was before Loom was a thing, but I just found that to be a really interesting way to communicate. And that kind of brute forced my way to not feeling weird in doing that. But from there, it really became in handy once being on camera became a thing, right? When Zoom, post pandemic, it just became, or during the pandemic at least, Zoom became really the default way that you meet with people. And again, if you're having a conversation, a lot of business and a lot of choices around life, we're influenced by the person. And if we can feel connected through them, which I think we can through video, good things happen. But those have been some wins. I am an entrepreneur, so I'm always trying to sell things. I sell, startup and entrepreneurship programs. And whenever you're selling something, I never just send over the proposal. I always send over the proposal and then a 30, 60-second video of saying, hey, you got this proposal, why you should work with me. But I thought I'd talk a little bit about why I'm so passionate about this. And, just saying a couple points with some energy in your voice, it goes a long way. So that helped me close a lot of deals. But it also, again, creates this wonderful sense of connection where I will meet people who, they feel like they know me, even though we've never met in person, just because they've seen my work and felt that connection. So there's been a lot of upsides from doing it. And not to mention the fact that video as a medium is pretty popular on socials, right? A lot of the algorithms optimize for that. And once you get good at it, it turns out that being on camera and being able to speak to the camera and tell a good story, this is actually much faster than writing and other things. So once you develop that muscle and get those habits and get really good at it, it becomes not only more effective, but it's also more efficient. So I could keep going on, but there's a lot of good reasons to learn video.
It's just so interesting what you said right there about video being a lot more personal than perhaps just an email for getting whatever you want. You are actually one of the reasons that I started putting myself on camera, and something really interesting happened just a week or two ago. So I'd gone for this wildlife event, let me call it that. But there were a lot of these wildlife folks, the crowd, that I like to hang around with. There was this one lady who came up to me and she struck up a conversation, and then I realized that I had actually sent a pitch to her organization to write for them. They have a media outlet and they accepted because I'd sent a video pitch. And this is something I'd forgotten that I did. So she was just speaking to me and she was like, I thought I recognized you. So we hadn't met in person until that point. And she was like, I thought I recognized you because you had sent a video pitch. This is the guy who sent a video pitch. And then it struck me, and that was just a lovely conversation. Yeah, I think it's something that stays in people's minds. Perhaps there are two things. I think they get to see you and they get to hear your voice. That sort of lends itself to a very personal connection.
Yeah, exactly. Just to go on that a little bit, think about the technology of writing, of writing out a paragraph and sending it. Our brains did not evolve to process writing. That's a relatively new thing that we have learned how to do culturally, civilly, and through like a lens of civilization. Registering facial expressions, that is something we are very, very good at. We know how to recognize if someone's happy, if they're sad. And so again, what it's doing is it's conveying more information. And again, you're already doing something unique and innovative when you include that little video pitch when you did that. But it also gave her, again, one more way to remember you. And, the world is a noisy, crowded place. The internet there's just a lot going on there. And so I think if you're trying to make your dent in the universe, if you're trying to make your mark, we need to do everything we can to find ways to stand out, to separate ourselves, to be a little bit more memorable, a little bit more unique. And this is, what you did is just a great example of that, right? It's just one more way for them to remember you in that stack of resumes that they're looking at for who they're going to hire. The video, it sets you apart. So that's a lot of my work, is helping people figure out the psychological side of it, figuring out how do you look at the lens and tell a good story, but also the production side of, microphone, lighting, background, all that kind of stuff. Just because the thing I love about the background stuff is that you have to get it going, but once it's set up, it's just there for you. It's always good. Some days you're not going to have great energy. You might sound a little lethargic, not as passionate as you want to, but if your background looks good, that's going to look good no matter what. Right?
Take me through that. So this, in teaching people, at least I would assume that most of the problems they face are emotional ones. And so what are some of the things you've noticed while guiding people through this process of getting themselves on camera?
Sure. And I'll stick on the psychological piece, and we can go beyond that if you want. But to your point, the mental part of it is a big one. It's some fraught emotional terrain for a lot of people. There's some people who have, actor training, and they're great. They know how to do this kind of stuff. But most of us do not. And so it's just wild. It's wild that we can be at coffee with a friend having a conversation and everything's fine. But this device called a camera, that is nothing more than glass, plastic, a little bit of metal, just there's nothing special about it. That, when it is turned on, is enough to make us feel off, to make us feel weird, and make us feel not ourselves, right? To make us feel performative. So in terms of that's a big part of the problem. But the simplest way to get really good at this is just spend a lot of time doing it. If you make 500 videos, you'll get very good at it. And so an exercise that I give a lot of people for this is something called a hello video. And a hello video is when you pull up your phone, record a selfie video to your mom, your dad, your friend, whatever, and just say, hey, I was thinking of you the other day because I walked by this thing and it reminded me of you. Anyway, I hope you're good. Bye. Talk to you soon. That's not anything particularly elegant as far as storytelling is concerned. We're not worrying about production. But what it's giving you is just one more time, one just a little bit of practice, like getting one more rep in. And so doing that gets you there. Like if you just do that, you're guaranteed to get better. There's a lot more advanced stuff. And if you want it to happen quicker, there's a lot of stuff I can get into to kind of speed up the learning curve. But just being on camera and knowing that you don't need to be perfect every time. And some people, they really like learning that it's okay to stutter or to say, or to blink. And in fact, that makes you seem more human, right? The internet, dead internet theory says that, the internet's going to be full of AI generated slop. And when you look at the camera and you're maybe blink too much or speak too fast, that's just your humanity coming through. So no, it's just something where if you practice, you'll get better at it. And it's something that also anyone can learn it. Some people think, well, I can never do that. I can see these people being really good on camera, but that's not for me. And I have definitively found that not to be true, that anyone can get it as long as they spend the time, get used to, and just experiment.
I want to jump in here and give you a chance to plug some of your resources, because I think there's a lot of I believe there's a word for it, resources that people give you to get you to sign up for their newsletter. I forgot what it was called, but I don't think yours is like that. I think your resources on getting people to sign up, like those free courses. I mean, I'll let you do it, but yeah, I mean, you go ahead. You can.
Yeah. So I have 3 things that I kind of help people with. The first one is if you join my newsletter, there's a free kind of 2-week camera confidence challenge. So it's a 2 weeks of, you get an email in your inbox once a day that gives you an exercise or a new way to think about this kind of stuff. So that's totally free. And my newsletter is free. I have a course that costs, $50 American, which is just, again, a little bit in more depth, and it just goes a little bit longer. And then there's some people or some folks I deal with who they're in a leadership position in their company and they have like influence in their organization and they feel ashamed. They feel really embarrassed that they're really bad on camera when the 22-year-old new hire who's just, a lower level in the company is much more confident, much better than them on camera. So they feel really embarrassed. Those people I do coaching with. And so, and again, it'll be just us kind of one-on-one experimenting with the technology, the setup, all that kind of stuff, giving them exercise and giving them a chance to practice. But those are kind of the three ways I help people. But yeah, if you just join my newsletter, I talk about this stuff all the time. I'm always sharing ideas and exercises and ways to think about this stuff that can help.
Nice. And cat videos, and that's another thing we'll get into. So, but about production, just a little bit. I mean, I think from what I'm gathering, your theme is keep it simple. And so what are those simple production tips people can do? Because I mean, I've attended so many Zoom lectures. I was one of those pandemic college kids. So well, my first semester of university was online, and I've seen a lot of bad Zoom setups. How do you think you should address that?
Yeah, my take on how to set up Zoom is to keep it simple. And what I've got going on here is a lot, but that's because I'm teaching people this stuff. Your average person doesn't need a backlight. I mean, you can see there's a light back there going against the background. But again, a lot of my gear is not particularly expensive. My camera is a Sony a6400, which is not a particularly sophisticated model. This is a Yeti Blue mic. It's, again, not super fancy. I'm a big fan of cheap gear just because what if you drop it? And it's just like having overly expensive gear. There's some mental weight that comes with that in that you've got to like worry about dropping it or someone stealing it or all kinds of stuff. So I'm a big fan of inexpensive gear, using it well. And again, my newsletter and that kind of free resource, the Camera Confidence Challenge that I mentioned, some really basic stuff, basic tricks like face a window. And if natural light's coming in, you're good. There's things like filming during the golden hour, which is when the sun is rising or the sun is setting. And that creates a really warm, natural light. There's just a lot of things like that that can go a long way. You don't really need a ton of gear. And if you're trying to film a pilot to sell to Netflix, then yeah, you need to have really great stuff. But most of the people I work with, they're not even full-time creators. They're not trying to become YouTubers. What they are is they do something. Whether they're an academic or they have a job or they're an entrepreneur, they just know that being on camera would be really helpful for their lives and their work. It would help amplify their influence. And in my case, I do a lot of instruction, a lot of storytelling. I love telling a story in front of 40 people in a room. That's a great thing and it lights me up. But I love the fact that if I tell that same story to the camera, as long as LinkedIn servers or YouTube servers are running, that story can have impact and bring business and opportunities my way until LinkedIn shuts down. So there's a lot of value around that as well. But the production, you don't need to overdo it. Just getting up to a certain level is great. And the particular philosophy I teach is called minimum viable video. And it just means let's get good enough, but we don't need to get to Hollywood levels of production. Let's just if we get up to good enough, we're better than 90% everybody else. And a lot of people, their video setup look terrible. They look like they're not even trying. And so just a little bit of effort goes a long.
Yeah, I think we're in a new sort of digital age where these things matter. I'm going to plug your course a little more because I'm actually one of those testimonials on the website. So I think people should check it out. All the links shall be provided. I mean, I'm glad you brought up minimum viable video. I think all the things that you were describing is to get people to make a minimum viable video. And so you used to also teach this as a course to people. And so take us into that story of the MVP.
Yeah, so minimum viable video was an idea I had. I started this thing 2 weeks before the pandemic. So for some reason, I just had really good timing in that right before everyone was going to be on camera a lot, I started this course, a cohort-based course. And the basic premise around it is that a lot of the best way to learn this difficult stuff is to do it with other people. And, for some people, being on camera it's suffering. It is just makes them feel awful. And so if you do it with other people, you get to spread it out a little bit. You get to feel a sense of camaraderie and teamwork and all that. So I've been running that course for a while. These days, I just run it privately. So I ran it for Intel and for Silicon Valley Bank. And so when I do it for institutions now when they need it. But it's just like about a 4-week course and giving people exercises and practice around this sort of stuff. And people have different goals. Some people want to be great in Zoom so that when they're live, they're really good. But a lot of people know that for their career or for their entrepreneurship, that they need to have video content out on the world. And for some people, it's not even being on socials. They don't want to be a creator. What they want is that when people go to their website and they click on About Me, they want to be able to see a video that just has a little bit of story of why they do that kind of thing. And it goes back to the earlier theme we were talking about is a lot of people, like, again, think about it. Elon has more followers than Tesla. Human beings, we don't want to connect with businesses. We want to connect with other humans. And so when it's you telling the 60-second story of how you got doing the work that you're doing or why you started the company, that personal element to it is what really, really resonates. And so what I love is helping people get that. So they've got that up and working for them to help and grow their businesses.
I think you're getting to one of the core things that I like about what you do, in that it's platform agnostic, right? I mean, you can be an entrepreneur and of course land all these deals. I know you have famously landed $1,000 deal with this. That I can't even imagine what you must have felt then. But even if it means developing a closer relationship with a friend, sending them. So I send especially, I left boarding school, right? And so folks are all around the world now. And so I send them video messages to wish them happy birthday whenever the day comes. I remember when you came to Delhi, we were talking about cohort-based courses. So what you were running, the minimum viable video, was a cohort-based course. It happened. And this is bringing in your entrepreneurial hat. I think during the pandemic, we saw a sort of spike in CBCs, right? Rite of Passage, which is the writing course we were part of, the YouTube Academy, Ali Abdal's, and a few others. I was wondering if you could speak to that phenomena, because it's quite an anomaly.
Yeah, and cohort-based courses, the idea is that these are live courses, usually done on the internet. And, I got really deep into them right when the pandemic started. And so while this really strange phenomenon was happening here in the United States, I was meeting people and making friends. And so it was weird. But the pandemic for me was, I think, a lot less rough than it could have been, because I felt a lot of those connections that happened through the educational experiences. And there's another theory of learning that says all learning is social learning. That at the end of the day, good education is not really about information transfer. Information transfer is great for solving a specific problem. If you need to learn how to do taxes for an entertainment business, you can probably find a course on that will give you the exact information for that. And there's some problems that are shaped like that. But most of the time as human beings, we're not able to diagnose our faults and the challenges and things we're trying to learn. And for example, Rite of Passage, that course that you and I both know about writing, a lot of people there, they're learning a lot more than writing. They're learning about how they share their ideas with the world. Because it's one thing to write a great essay. It's another to hit publish and make that available for the world to see. And I think, again, you can learn those sorts of lessons better when you do it with a group of other people. And I really feel like those social bonds are really, really crucial to learning anything new. And I'm a big fan of cohort-based courses as a learning style, as opposed to solo information-based courses. I still, I do them, but I prefer group learning just because I enjoy those connections I make. And I'm also really, really big on feedback. I think feedback is underrated for everything in entrepreneurship, for everything in life. And when you take a cohort-based course, whenever you do a learning experience with a group of others, you have opportunities to ask other people to tell you what they think of your work. They can tell you where it's good and where it's bad. When they tell you where it's bad, that's an opportunity to learn and improve. Whereas if you're just by yourself, you miss out on those feedback loops. And that's another reason why I think cohort-based courses are such a big deal.
Do you see a time when we can see the return? Like right now, Rite of Passage has moved on. I think even the YouTube Academy has sort of taken a different form. And so do you see cohort-based courses ever coming back?
Yes, but the reason that those courses shut down was there's mixed reasons behind them. Some of them are that economics are difficult. When you run a cohort, there is one revenue recognition event. So I know people who would run a cohort-based course and they'd run 2 cohorts a year. And that means that during the year, there was 2 times for them to make money. And that's a harder premise than if you sell a membership model and someone's paying you every month, right? It diffuses some of that risk. So that's one of the reasons people went away with them. The other reason is that they grew artificially fast during the pandemic because you couldn't do anything else. So when the pandemic minimized, people could go outside again. And I think they were striving for a lot more in-person learning. But I think as a model, they're not going anywhere. They're just kind of tough for people to do. But they are fairly intense. And I know that Rite of Passage, that course ended, part of it was because the founder said, hey, I've been doing this for 9 years and he was pretty tired. It's a very intense experience. And I think a lot of, in my opinion, the best learning experiences are intense. And sometimes they involve discomfort. If you feel great the whole time, you're happy, but you may not be learning. There's some theories of education that say you need to have a little discomfort. You need to have a little friction for learning to truly drive home. And that was creating that really dramatic, intense experience was exhausting for him. I think they'll come back, but we'll see. I think what I think thematically is more interesting right now is I talked about feedback. I get a lot of feedback from ChatGPT. I show whenever I'm working on, I am asking GPT to tear it down and give me feedback on. And before, I always needed a human to do that. So again, I think in the education space, I'm really curious about what AI is going to do.
I mean, let's dive into that. That's not something that occurred to me. So how exactly, explain that process?
So the way I prefer to use AI for this kind of stuff is something called SITO, speech in, text out. You hit the microphone button on GPT, whether it's on the app, on your phone, or on the computer, and you can just talk to it. And because it's a language model, the transcription is really good. So I will speak for 5 minutes about an idea, just a long recording that it'll transcribe. And what's great about language models is you can stutter, you can say or you can, you don't need to say it perfectly. And it will then analyze and give you feedback. And that sometimes the feedback's terrible, but again, that back and forth process is where a lot of the value comes from. And before you had to go call a friend who you can only do it so many times before your friend is like, hey, dude, I got other things to do. So I'm really, really curious about kind of those paths and how people use AI for learning.
Could you walk us through an example?
So right now I'm pitching the government of Bermuda for an entrepreneurship plan. Bermuda is an island nation that doesn't have an entrepreneurship strategy, and they want one. So I am one of, I don't know how many people pitching them for this thing. So I have written, on Monday, I submitted a 26-page proposal that is in depth about the policy and the type, should we build a startup accelerator and how we'll get learning and all this stuff. AI was involved in almost every step of the process. Lots of brainstorming, lots of me just taking the proposal and shoving it in there and saying, hey, what's good here? What's bad? The nature of this particular opportunity was something called an RFP. I don't know if you're familiar with the term. That means a request for proposal. An RFP is when the government of any country says, hey, we've got a problem. We want to open up opportunities for people to bid we'll pay them to solve this problem. And that's what this is. They needed a strategy. So I'm one of the people who took my shot at it. And, if they like it, they'll choose me and they'll give me money and I'll build something to solve their problem. If they don't like it, they'll choose somebody else. But using AI, again, to double check my thinking, my reasoning, my phrasing, even the easy stuff like grammar and formatting and things like that was really, really helpful. And sometimes when I speak very, very informally. So for example, there are parts of this proposal that are around legislation and policy, which is not my area of expertise. I know a little bit, not a ton. But what I can do is dictate to GPT for a good 5 or 10 minutes about some rough ideas that I have around this and give it instructions to take what I've said and format this in the language, use the language, vocabulary, jargon of policy and legislation. So when I put in the proposal, it looks like I'm smarter than I am. So stuff like that.
You are very much an entrepreneur of the modern era. Let me say that. I mean, that's just a perfect segue into your entrepreneurial journey. Take us into that journey, what it was like.
Sure. I started a couple tech companies that went nowhere in Austin in my 20s. I was just a little too young, probably didn't know what I didn't know, and was starting really huge ideas that I didn't know enough to start. The first business I started was called RookieCast. This business was around when you're watching sports on TV. I think it's annoying when you're stuck with the commentators? What if you don't like those commentators? What if you want to hear, what if you're watching cricket and you want someone who's a statistics nerd to talk about cricket statistics in depth? Most people don't want that, but some people do. Why don't we have comedians calling a cricket game and cracking jokes? Like why don't things like that exist? So we were building a platform for that. And the way we did it was you would still watch the game on television. You would just go to our website, which would have different channels of streaming audio. And then there was a slider where you would sync up the audio with the game. Interesting idea, but completely illegal. People who broadcast sports, they don't want anyone using their content or repurposing it in any way. So once we got a couple of letters from the lawyers, we decided not to push it. I started another business that didn't go well. The mistake we made there is we worked too hard on building a final product instead of building a prototype and getting testing early. But my third business was called 3-Day Startup. And this was a short format entrepreneurship program. And our big thing was, why would you take a semester of college to learn something that's all theory? And it might even be taught by someone who's never started a business before. This is dumb, we thought. What we believed in was the best way to learn how to start a company is by starting a company. So our market was college students, and we would sell this to universities, and it was like a hackathon, but really a little bit more for business with a little bit more structure. But students would start ideas, and some of these ideas were really dumb, which is fine. Starting stupid ideas and building them. The best way to learn that they're stupid is let the market tell you they're stupid, not let some mentor or some professor tell you it's dumb. And this model turned out to work really, really well. We had pretty early on, Etsy acquired one of the companies that came out of it. And then a couple years later, Google bought one of the companies that came out of this program. But we ran this all over the world in 50 different countries. And that's when I got to learn really what it means to start a company. But I found my true passion, which is, again, education. So doing that for a decade, being the CEO of that company, let me learn a lot about how to grow a business. And again, we didn't even have any meaningful intellectual property there. There was nothing unique. The idea of a 3-day startup bootcamp is not special. So we just learned, we executed really well. Our timing was good. We didn't do stupid things. And that was great. That worked out really, really well. So I can go into more depth on that story, but effectively we just, we were careful, we were thoughtful. We figured out the business model pretty quickly, and we didn't do dumb things.
Wow. Yeah. That's interesting. There's a lot to unpack there. Look, this idea of being an entrepreneur, I think in many places it's sort of glamorized. What is that lifestyle like? What are the mental hurdles that you had to walk through while going through, all these 3 companies?
At the time, entrepreneurship wasn't cool. If you told someone you were an entrepreneur, they thought that was code for you sleep on your mom's couch in the basement. These days it's cool, but at the time it wasn't. But there's a lot of hurdles to doing that. It's challenging and scary and uncertain. And part of our thesis was that, again, by getting some of these like-minded people together, it'll seem less scary. Think about if you have a job and you have a boss, and your boss is annoying or stupid or makes you do dumb things. Everybody can relate. Everybody has had a bad boss, or they understand the concept. But being an entrepreneur where customers aren't buying what you're selling or investors aren't giving you money, this is not as common. And so part of our program, which was really powerful, was giving people an opportunity to get together and share these things and just make them not feel as lonely. But yeah, there's a lot of mental hurdles. And part of the work I do is in the United States, it's a culture where you can start something and fail, and people will give you another opportunity. In a lot of parts of the world, if you start something and fail, people think you're a loser. Of course it was going to fail. You're doomed for the rest of your life. You're never going to have an opportunity again. So a lot of my work these days, I still build startup programs, and I love doing that. When the Ministry of Innovation of Portugal hires me to run a startup program for them, I feel like they're paying me to create a reality distortion field where it's okay to have some out there ideas. It's okay to have a little bit of ambition. It's okay to try things that maybe they're not going to work perfectly, right? And I think it's one of those things that it's a really powerful thing to get. Now, the United States, like Silicon Valley in particular, these are places where you can do things like that. And I think that's one of the best startup ecosystems in the world. But what I'm a big believer in is I think that the second best startup ecosystem in the world is the internet. And that's what I love about X. And that's what I love about cohort-based courses. And that's what I love about, WhatsApp groups that specialize in this kind of stuff, is that you in your daily life might feel lonely in an entrepreneurial lens. Like you might not know people who think this way, but you can find those people on the internet. And that's what I really value a ton, is that in some ways, the friends and connections and colleagues I've met on the internet, they're more similar to me sometimes than, my next door neighbor in Austin. So I'm a big fan of finding that community on the internet.
I mean, I love what you mentioned there. I think this is something I've noticed as well in people from America, that, I mean, they don't really stigmatize failure. They sort of embrace it, which is, I think, a lovely mindset to have. Yeah, I mean, it's not quite the case in at least in India, I can say that. At least not yet. I don't want to say things are set in stone, but I think that mindset is really important. Okay, so in 3 days startup, in that program, from that, what did you learn about identifying good ideas?
I learned a ton about identifying good ideas, but one of the main things I learned is that no one can recognize good ideas. There would be concepts that I think were so exciting and great, and they wouldn't go anywhere. And then there was other things I thought were stupid would become huge successes. And this wasn't novel just from that. I remember when Netflix started sending DVDs in the mail, I thought that was so stupid. I thought, we're going to be streaming movies in 6 months. Why are we doing this? And it took 8 or 9 years before Netflix streaming really took off. And if you think about recognizing good ideas, venture capitalists, it's their job to recognize good ideas. Their success in their career is 100% dependent on their ability to recognize good ideas. Yet they fail all the time. So the big takeaways there are execution is really what matters. And that's why speed is such an important thing in startups. The sooner you get started, the sooner you can find out something doesn't work. And the sooner you find out it doesn't work, you can try the next thing. And one of the big reframes that I've had over the years of doing this kind of work is thinking probabilistically. And what I mean by that is, instead of being single-minded focused on your goal, okay, I'm just targeted 100%. I don't think that way at all. I think we're going to try 10 different things, and hopefully one or two are not complete failures. And that reframe is really helpful when you say, okay, if I'm going to have the 80% failure rate, as long as I don't die, everything's fine. And don't die, don't run out of money, these sorts of things. But you don't need to get things perfect. You just need to be directionally correct. So I think ideas are very much overrated. And it really comes down to, again, just making good decisions and being experimental in how you approach things.
So then what would you say was different in those folks who you said succeeded? Like, you had guys getting acquired by Google and Etsy. I mean, that's not a small feat. And so what do you think set them apart from the rest of the?
Let's be clear, they were also very, very lucky. And I consider myself extremely lucky. Like, luck is a huge part of this, right? A startup is usually, it almost dies 10 times. It's just very, very common. So there were things that set them apart for sure, but I want to be clear that luck plays a huge role in these things. So that was a big piece of it. They tend to move quickly. They tend to be decisive. They weren't always right, but they were decisive. And what I mean by that is they would make decisions. One trap that I fall into sometimes is I get scared to make a decision, because when you make a decision, you can be wrong, right? And none of us want to be wrong. But what they were really good at is they would make decisions. And if it didn't work, that's fine. But they could try the next thing. So some people call that rate of learning, like ROL. If the rate of learning is high, good things will happen. So they that sort of thing. It also takes some emotional adjustment to realize that you definitely do not know everything and you will not know everything. So it's very humbling. Being an entrepreneur is a good way to discover how much you do not know. It's like kind of like the Socrates thing of, like, the reason he knew he was the wisest man was he knew how much he didn't know. A lot of being an entrepreneur is like realizing how much you don't know. And that's also, I find that very confidence inspiring. It's wonderful to know that you don't need to know everything. And a lot of the most brilliant people, they don't succeed as entrepreneurs. A lot of people who get incredibly good grades are terrible entrepreneurs. And a lot of the people who are so smart and so gifted, they can think of great ideas, but they also keep thinking of reasons why things won't work and therefore don't take action. Whereas, again, taking action is the important thing. And that's why my company is called Action Works. It's our ethos, our philosophy is, listen, you got to get started. The sooner you get started, the more learning you'll get, the more learning you get, the advantage you have. And I think it's also quite interesting in that, the most scarce thing, a lot of people think it's a technical co-founder, someone to help you build badass software. That, like, might have been true at some point, but I'm really surprised, again, back to AI, like how powerful AI can help you build great software very, very quickly. And so I think a bigger, more scarce resource is understanding what is a problem people have and understanding that problem and then building something that can solve it. Right. But it's very non-deterministic and it's something where you're never going to know all the answers. So sometimes the best thing is just to get started.
You've done this program you've run it in Mexico recently. You said Portugal. I know you've done it here in India. What are some of those differences you've noticed in the way students sort of go about the program in these different places?
In different cultures?
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated with that, the difference in attitudes of different cultures. So I'll just give you some of the highlights. Korea was a weird one. When I went to Korea, I never have been interrogated as much as I was interrogated there. The faculty of KAIST, which is the MIT of Korea, sat me down and they were asking me questions, but they weren't asking in a friendly way. They were asking to try to extract like all the knowledge I had, which I thought was kind of interesting. I was a little worried about Germany. Germany is a very rule following culture. And, our approach to this is a little more laissez-faire, a little more open, a little more experimental, a little more let's move fast and break things. But the Germans actually took to it really, really well. So that was exciting. In Mexico, a lot of demand, but it kind of depends on the region we're in. But what I see the big difference is the people who spend a lot of time on X, a lot of time on Twitter, you can tell. You can tell the people who've been paying attention. And the people who haven't been, they don't subscribe to a bunch of newsletters, they're not on Twitter, they usually have a lot more to learn because they're not as familiar with these sorts of developments. Ellie was really interesting. Those founders were sharp. They were really, really sharp, but still, I think, learning how to work through some of those things. And I think also the communication styles are interesting. I once ran a program in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and Israeli founders are very loud and they're very direct. So this founding team, they were having an argument. The two co-founders are yelling at each other. And I was pretty sure one of them was going to punch the other guy. And so I'm getting ready to intervene and to de-escalate the situation. And then the one guy goes, no, but actually, what about this? Did you consider this? And the guy goes, that's a good point. And then they just both went back to work. So they immediately de-escalated. So again, very, very passionate founders in Israel. And again, I remember on that trip, I got to have, I went to a restaurant that had 36 different types of hummus, which again, for me, that's a real joy to go to these places and get a sense of how the different cultures approach food and life and family and all these things. But yeah, different places like in Australia. Australia is the highest fear of failure of any developed country. So they have something called tall poppy syndrome. Tall poppy syndrome is when one person wants to aim really big and try something huge. The other people are like, stop. Who do you think you are? Do you think you're special? Do you think you're better than us? Australia has a lot of that. A lot of my work in Australia is, again, trying to help saying, no, we're all in this together. We can do this, right? And helping grow an ecosystem. Silicon Valley, I will poop on it a lot. I got a lot of problems with Silicon Valley. But if you say a really weird idea out loud, no one says, what's wrong with you? No one says that. They're like, okay. Again, I think that sort of initial attitude and openness to new ideas is a key part of people being able to start a business.
Wow. There's so much to take from that. So, we're approaching the end. I have a few last sort of stray questions. Since, a lot of your work is free for people to read on your newsletter, which I follow. I think everyone should. The link will be there. We met in Rite of Passage, the online course. And so I'm just curious, what is writing done for you? This is a question I ask all writers because the answers you get are so interesting.
So writing has opened up a ton of doors for me, and it's really changed my life in a lot of different ways. The first one is I learned pretty quickly that what people love about my newsletter is the crazy stories and the adventures I have. They like that way more than like my theories of business. So I tend to write more about those stories. But writing those stories, it helps me remember them more clearly. And it gives me a record of them, right? I put them on my blog and I get to have them. And those memories stay very crisp and clear in my mind. So it's this, in a way, lets me time travel. It lets me preserve these moments and then revisit them. So that's really special. But there's another thing that's really special about it in that there's a You probably have heard of Dunbar's number. Dunbar's number says that groups of people, on the savannah as we were evolving, our brains developed at a time when we lived in tribes of about 150 people. So that we as humans are evolved to keep track of about 150 relationships. And any more than that, it doesn't really work. It's just really hard for our brains to keep those people straight. The newsletter lets me break Dunbar's number. I have 3,000 subscribers, something like that. And when I talk about my life, when I share these stories, way more than 150 people get to know what's going on in my life. And I'm really grateful for that because I get all these replies that are encouraging me when I'm dealing with something tough or congratulating me when something good happens. When people visit Austin, people in the newsletter will say, hey, I'm coming to town. Do you want to meet up? And I love that. That's like my favorite thing. There was a time about 10 years ago where if someone from where I grew up was coming to town, I'd be super excited to meet him. I didn't have a newsletter then. I wasn't really on the internet that much. But if someone from the internet said I want to meet up, I'd be like, that's weird. Is this person going to murder me? Now it's flipped. Now when someone on my newsletter or someone I know from posting on Twitter and that sort of thing visits, I'm so excited to meet up with them. Whereas when someone from my hometown wants to meet up, I'm like, okay, whatever. So writing, again, has been really interesting for that social fabric it's created. It's gotten me to become a better speaker. Also, again, it's created some deal flow as well. It's been something where when I go run a program like in Mexico or when I do something in Delhi, warms my heart and gives me so much joy to work with those founders and work with those business people or work with those students or do whatever. But when I write about it, I have this thing on the internet that is evidence of me doing this work. And the metaphor is to think about it like a lighthouse, right? It's a lighthouse that's shining this. And what happens is that some other group, some other university or some other government will see that, oh, he did that in Delhi. We should hire him to do the same thing. So it's been really helpful from a business standpoint. It's been great all around. So I'm very, very appreciative and grateful of the gifts that writing has given me.
I think one thing that people perhaps might not expect in your newsletter are the cat gifs that at the end, you probably don't remember this, but when we met, we were talking about cats, and you said that's like you had just told me that somehow became part of your brand, and that bit of our conversation has really stuck with me because it's so interesting that is such an integral part right now of your visual consistency. And so I mean, I'm just curious to know that story of how those cats have become so famous.
Yeah. So when my girlfriend moved in, she brought her two cats. And one of them really, one of them, Pinky, is the one who's in all the photos. And if you all subscribe to my newsletter, the link is camhauser.com/newsletter. There's a big picture of Pinky the cat right there. And maybe she'll join, we'll see. But she knew that if I was sitting here in front of the camera, she knew I wasn't going to go anywhere. So she would jump on the table just to be there because she knows she'd get attention. And it is one of those things where she's a funny looking cat. And it is interesting, like how many people remember that. And there have been, I told you, whenever I'm trying to get a new customer, I send a proposal, here's the work we could do, but I'll send that video. And a lot of times I'll have Pinky the cat, I will bring her and set her in the video. And it gives people a little laugh. It's something they're not expecting. But sometimes I'll send a Loom video. And with Looms, you can track the views and you can see who's seen it. And the cat is the reason that the thing will get forwarded around. And it's just one more way to stand out. And as a strategy, be good at what you do. Like develop those skills and be good at what you do. But at some point, there's going to be people who have the exact same skills in you. So then you just need something a little different. And that's what Pinky the cat has given me. Just be a little bit different, a little bit more memorable. And for me, the goal I want is that when they have a problem they need solved and they realize, I want them to remember that I'm the person that can help them do that. And if the cat helps me do that, so be it.
I think if there's one takeaway from this, it should be that you should get a cat and you should put it in your videos.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, we're almost at the end. On this podcast, I have a closing tradition, and you can take this however you'd like. If you had access to billboards across the world for like a day, what is the one message you'd put there for the world?
My first thought is just keep it really simple. And I'd say something like, I think some of the best advice to give people is it's helpful to get people started, but whenever we start anything new, whenever we start a new year, whenever we have some new ideas, we start a new career, whatever, starting is one thing. Sometimes I think when we need the help is when we get into the valley, where things are. So the thing I would say would be keep going. There's a lot of times when you're in the middle of something and it's not going well, and you think, oh, this is terrible. I got to give this up. Usually, I think we should persist and usually keep going. So to keep it super short and sweet, I would say, yeah, keep going.
Thank you, Cam. Thank you for your time.
Ishan, it's been a pleasure, and sending all the best to everybody out there. I hope you all enjoyed this, and thank you for doing this. I really appreciate the opportunity.